The fateful day began like any other, but there was a heaviness in the air that Bidemi couldn't quite understand. She woke up before dawn, her small body already used to the rhythm of her life. Mama had prepared pap and akra for breakfast, and though the meal was meager, Mama made sure Bidemi ate enough. "Eat well, my child," Mama said gently, her eyes tired but tender. "You need your strength." Bidemi nodded, forcing a smile. She didn't tell Mama that her heart ached every time she thought of school. It had been weeks since she last attended, sent home by the headmaster because she had come barefoot, her uniform patched and tattered. "Go back and tell your mother to buy you proper clothes and shoes before you return," the headmaster had said harshly. She had walked home that day, head bowed in shame, tears streaming down her cheeks. Her classmates had laughed at her as she left, some whispering cruel words about her poverty. Only her class mistress, Miss Ekaite, had looked at her with pity. Bidemi knew the woman noticed more than she let on: the torn shoes, the empty lunch box, the way Bidemi ate her friends' leftovers during break time. Even now, as she sat on the wooden stool eating her breakfast, the memory burned in her chest. She wanted so badly to go back to school, to sit in class and learn like the other children. But how could she tell Mama? There was barely enough money for food. How could they afford new shoes or uniforms? When she finished eating, Bidemi picked up her tray of oranges and set out into the streets of Lagos. The city was already awake, its chaos humming like a restless giant. She moved through the traffic, calling out her usual refrain, "Orange! Buy sweet orange!" The day was like any other until the sun reached its peak. The heat was unbearable, and Bidemi's feet ached from walking on the hot pavement. She paused under a shade to catch her breath when she heard a commotion nearby. A danfo had screeched to a halt, and people were shouting. Bidemi's heart skipped as she saw a little boy, no older than 4, crying in the middle of the road. A car was speeding toward him, the driver oblivious. Without thinking, Bidemi dropped her tray and ran into the street. She grabbed the boy and pulled him to safety just as the car zoomed past, missing them by inches. The crowd cheered, some calling her brave, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Bidemi held the boy close, her heart pounding like a drum. Thank you," a woman cried, rushing over to take the boy. She was the child's mother, and tears streamed down her face. "You saved my son. God bless you, my dear." But Bidemi barely heard her. She looked back at her tray, now overturned, the oranges scattered and crushed under the wheels of passing cars. Her breath caught in her throat as the weight of the situation hit her. She had nothing to take home to Mama. When she finally made it home that evening, her feet dragging and her stomach empty, Mama was waiting as always. The sight of her mother's hopeful face broke something inside her. "What happened, Bidemi?" Mama asked, her voice trembling as she saw the empty tray. Tears spilled down Bidemi's cheeks. She told Mama everything: the boy, the car, the lost oranges. She expected Mama to be angry, to scold her for being careless. Instead, Mama pulled her into a tight embrace. "You are my brave child," Mama whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Oranges can be replaced. Lives cannot." But that night, as Bidemi lay on her mat, the hunger gnawed at her. She thought about school, about her friends eating during break while she sat alone. She thought about Mama working late into the night, trying to make ends meet. Her little body shook with silent sobs as she whispered into the darkness, "God, please help us. Please don't let Mama suffer anymore." Somewhere in the distance, the city of Lagos carried on, indifferent to her pain. But in their small room, a mother and her daughter clung to each other, their love the only shield against the harshness of the world. The story begins with a diplomat, Mr. Raymond, pacing his living room after hearing his wife and son recount their harrowing experience in the Lagos market. His wife, Margaret, is still visibly shaken, clutching their son, David, to her chest. "She was so brave, Raymond," Margaret said for the umpteenth time, her voice thick with emotion. If not for that girl, we would have lost him. Mr. Raymond sat down heavily, his gaze fixed on his son. David, just 8 years old, clung to his mother, his wide eyes still filled with the remnants of terror. "What do you remember about her, David?" Mr. Raymond asked gently. David frowned, his small face twisting in concentration. "She was skinny, and she had a tray of oranges. She wore a dress that looked old. But she was fast, Daddy. She ran and pulled me away before the car could hit me." Margaret added, "She couldn't have been more than 10 or 11 years old, Raymond. She looked so tired, so small. And her tray, her oranges were ruined because of us. She didn't even wait for a thank you before she left." Mr. Raymond's chest tightened. This girl, whoever she was, had saved his only child, risking her own life in the process. He owed her everything. "We have to find her," he said firmly. "But how?" Margaret asked. "She disappeared into the crowd so quickly. And the market was so busy, there were so many people." "We'll go back," Mr. Raymond said. "We'll ask around. Someone must know her." The next morning, Mr. Raymond and Margaret returned to the bustling Lagos market, accompanied by their driver. They began stopping at every stall, describing the girl as best as they could. "She's about 10 years old, dark-skinned, thin, carrying a tray of oranges," Margaret would say. "Do you know a girl like that?" Mr. Raymond would add, his tone almost pleading. But the market was teeming with hawkers, many of them children, and the description was too vague. Stall owners shook their heads apologetically. Some directed them to other parts of the market, but no one seemed to know the girl they were looking for. "She might not even live near here," Margaret whispered, discouraged. "What if she was just passing through?" "We'll keep looking," Mr. Raymond insisted. By the end of the day, they were exhausted but determined. "We'll come back tomorrow," Mr. Raymond said as they climbed into their car. And they did. Day after day, they returned to the market, asking anyone who would listen. They visited nearby streets, knocking on doors and speaking to shopkeepers. Some people were helpful, others dismissive. "She could be one of those hawkers who live far away," one man told them. "Many of them come from other neighborhoods to sell their goods." "Or she might not even have a home," a woman added, shaking her head sadly. "Some of these kids sleep on the streets." The words struck Margaret like a blow. "Raymond," she whispered that night as they lay in bed. "What if she doesn't have a home? What if we never find her?" A message for you. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Don't forget to press the notification bell so you won't miss more heartwarming stories like this one. And remember, no matter how hard life gets, your helper of destiny is just around the corner. Keep believing.